Chapter 888. Number 16 Qingming Alley, Yuzhou. 2 years ago, for the huge Yuzhou, this was a completely dispensable place. For the past 2 years, this place had always been an extremely awkward place. Today, 2 years later, this place had almost been completely forgotten by people. Number 16 Qingming Alley was not a small place. It was a courtyard house. Although it was a little old, the environment was still passable. In Yuzhou, where the pace of life was so fast that it made people dizzy, this area could be considered a leisurely place. A leisurely area. A group of people who didn't want to wait for death. Therefore, the atmosphere in the courtyard house had always been very strange. The falling snow dyed the courtyard and walls of the courtyard house white. There was a reclining chair in front of the entrance hall of the courtyard house. Lu Qing was lying on the reclining chair, watching the snowflakes slowly fall on his body. His eyes were numb, like a salted fish without a dream. There were people busy in every room of the courtyard house. Searching for information, comparing files, analyzing intelligence. It seemed to be a very busy scene. But in fact, everyone was a little absent-minded. A middle-aged man next to Lu Qing was squatting and smoking. The tobacco fell on the snow with the hot air from his mouth. The middle-aged man shook his head with a depressed expression. What are we now? Lu Qing looked at the snowflakes and suddenly laughed at himself. The words of the middle-aged man, who looked extremely depressed, were even more depressing. The task force, yes, the task force. Lu Qing nodded and smiled a little strangely. A high position and a great responsibility. The task force sounds quite scary, but what can we investigate? The information in our hands has been turned over. Apart from the information, we have nothing else. The key is that our case has made no progress, but the person involved in the case has already swaggered to Yuzhou. What's the point of our so-called task force? Investigation. The middle-aged man said gloomily. His tone was so honest that it made people cry. Lu Qing seemed to be used to the other party's temper. He shook his head and suddenly said, I want to leave this place, leave this damn place. In the eyes of Yuzhou, our so-called task force is a joke. We have always been a joke. The middle-aged man sighed and finished a cigarette before lighting another. Lu Qing didn't say anything. It seemed that he had nothing to say to the people around him. The task force had been established for 2 years. He was the third team leader of the task force. After 3 consecutive personnel changes, the task force, which had caused a sensation due to its high standards, had become more and more inconspicuous. The first leader of the task force was Yi Dongsheng, councilman rank. The second team leader was Fan Tianyin, the minister of the Ministry of Security of Zhongzhou State. The rank of a governor. Lu Qing was the third team leader. Before becoming the team leader, he was the Secretary General of the Military Secretary Office. Deputy Governor level. This position could be said to be a direct descendant of the Special Warfare Group. This was also the result of the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group's struggle to control the leadership of the task force. And there was only one thing they wanted to investigate. That was to investigate whether Qi Mulan's family, which had been wiped out by Li Tianlan, had committed treason and whether they had colluded with the Burning Legion. After Lu Qing became the leader of the task force, his only job was to prove that Qi Mulan had nothing to do with the Burning Legion. As long as he could prove this, then Li Tianlan's annihilation of the Qi family at that time would be a felony. Regardless of what would happen to Li Tianlan, at least he would have to stay in the desert prison for a few more years. No one could find any evidence of Qi Mulan colluding with the Burning Legion. But no one could find evidence to prove Qi Mulan's innocence. This so-called task force had no direction of investigation at the beginning. Moreover, neither Yi Dongsheng nor Fan Tianyin paid much attention to this matter. This matter dragged on for almost 2 years. By the time Lu Qing came over, even if there was any previous evidence, it had been erased without a trace. This position was like a quagmire. Lu Qing was trapped in it on the first day he took office. There was no progress in the whole case since he became the team leader. Lu Qing often felt that he was a joke, and the task force was also a joke. They carried out the so-called investigation every day. Day after day, Lu Qing didn't even know whether the task force was seriously investigating or pretending. And now, the task force was not disbanded. There was no clear conclusion. Li Tianlan came directly to Yuzhou from the desert. He hadn't been in Yuzhou for a long time, but until now, no one in Jianghu state had raised any question about it. The existence of the task force seemed to have been completely forgotten. Lu Qing felt that he really seemed to have become a joke. He couldn't find any evidence, and he didn't know how long he would have to suffer in this courtyard house. He lay on the recliner, looking at the snowflakes in the sky, and said with numb eyes, "What do you want to eat for lunch?" "Instant noodles?" The middle-aged man who was smoking beside him looked depressed. He was different from Lu Qing. Lu Qing served as the team leader of the task force, and the special warfare group had high hopes for him. They hoped that he could find some evidence that could directly hit Li Tianlan. He was shouldering a heavy burden. But with the departure of Yi Dongsheng and Chen Fangqing, more and more people didn't take the task force seriously. Now the personnel transferred in were basically players who were not successful in various units. The middle-aged man's name was Li Liang. Before he came to the task force, he was the deputy director of a department of the police department. When he came, he also received a punishment. The others were roughly the same. For them, whether in their original units or in the task force, they were a joke, so it didn't matter where they were. "Let's eat hot pot." Lu Qing felt the cold in the air, and his heart was also cold. He was from Xinan City, and at this time, he particularly missed the hot pot in his hometown. "Are you treating?" Li Liang raised his head and glanced at him. "Do you want to drink at noon?" Lu Qing looked a little annoyed. After a moment of silence, he said hoarsely, "Then let's eat instant noodles." Team leader is right. Let's eat hot pot. My treat. A hearty laugh suddenly rang out. A strong and burly figure walked in the door, and his voice was loud. Lu Qing's eyes narrowed, and he said lightly, "Director Gua, you're in a good mood." Gua Yu, the director of the intelligence department of the General Staff Department and the first deputy team leader of the task force. Under the situation that the General Staff Department was managed by Yi Dongsheng, Gua Yu could be said to be Yi Dongsheng's direct confidant. He was not pushed to be the deputy team leader of the task force, but he was here in name only and rarely appeared on weekdays. In other words, he still worked in the General Staff Department. The deputy team leader was a part-time job. And Lu Qing, no part-time job. "Yes, I'm in a good mood." Gua Yu glanced at Lu Qing with a smile. Looking at his salted fish expression, Gua Yu's eyes were a little pitiful. He held the file in his hand and glanced at Lu Qing sympathetically. This team leader still didn't know what the file in his hand meant. "Don't rush to eat, team leader. I have something important to report to you." Gua Yu stopped smiling and said with a serious face. Lu Qing was stunned, and then subconsciously sat up straight. "There's progress in the case?" "Yes." Gua Yu nodded. "The General Staff Department received some news that there's a major breakthrough in the case." He handed the file in his hand to Lu Qing and looked at him with more and more pity in his eyes. Lu Qing's hands and feet were cold, and his hand holding the file trembled a little. He didn't know what the so-called major breakthrough was. But the breakthrough in the General Staff Department made Gua Yu so happy. There was no doubt that this clue was beneficial to the Wang family of Beihai, or to Li Tianlan. And the person behind him absolutely didn't want to see this result. Lu Qing took the file and didn't dare to open it for a while. Lu Qing looked at him silently. He looked at his slightly trembling hand holding the file. Lu Qing lowered his head and opened the file little by little. Until this moment, he didn't know that maybe his hands would completely change the current situation of Jianghu state. The file was opened little by little. A confession that was obviously just recorded appeared in front of Lu Qing. The content of the confession was very long. There were a few pages of densely written paper. In addition to the confession, there were a few photos. And a small recording device. Lu Qing kept taking deep breaths and flipping through the confession in front of him. The photos were mixed in the paper and appeared in front of him when he flipped through the confession. There was a middle-aged man in the photo. In front of the middle-aged man sat a dignified old man. Lu Qing's heart suddenly jumped. The huge pressure made him a little suffocated for a while. He stared at the photo in front of him and seemed to be a little unbelievable. He trembled and said, "Who is this?" Guiyu knew what he was asking. There were two people in the photo. One of them didn't need to be asked, but the other needed to be explained. He smiled and said in a firm voice, "This person's code name is Black Eagle, a senior staff officer of the Burning Legion, a confidant of Legion Commander Ramalan, and one of the core military counselors of the Burning Legion." The confession is very clear that he was originally from Jianghu State, so after the Burning Legion took root in Tiannan, he was responsible for all the operations of the Burning Legion in Jianghu State. Guiyu's voice was like thunder, rumbling in Lu Qing's ears. In other words, he is the main person in charge of everything of the Burning Legion in Jianghu State. Crack. The wooden deck chair suddenly broke. Lu Qing suddenly stood up and stared at Guiyu. His expression was a little frightened, but more incredulous. You, he kept taking deep breaths and finally roared, "How dare you?" "It's the truth." Guiyu looked at him and said calmly, "The evidence is in your hands." The photo slipped down with Lu Qing's trembling hand and fell on the snow. Li Liang, who was squatting and smoking, glanced at it and subconsciously broke the cigarette between his fingers. Lu Qing took a deep breath and couldn't speak for a while. The task force that had been set up for 2 years had investigated many times, but he never dreamed that there would be such a so-called evidence. To prove that Qi Mulan committed treason? Lu Qing laughed, laughing with incomparable fear. He found that his thinking was still too simple. In the photo, the person facing Black Eagle was not Qi Mulan at all. It was the top leader behind the scenes of the Special Warfare Group. Qi Baizong, the former director of Jianghu State and the executive minister of the army headquarters. If the so-called evidence was spread, it would be a fierce storm that could sweep the whole Jianghu State. Lu Qing's voice was hoarse. "What the hell do you want to do?" Guiyu bent down to pick up the photo and said lightly, "I'm just doing my duty as a member of the task force." Chapter 889. Lu Qing looked down at the confession in his hand. The paper of the confession swayed slightly with the movement of his arm. He only felt that all this was extremely absurd. The confession was very long. The content was detailed and explosive. The man codenamed Black Shadow explained a lot of problems from beginning to end. To be exact, it was a series of cooperation problems between the Burning Legion and the Special Warfare Battalion. The target was not Qi Mulan. It was not even Qi Baizong. It was the whole Special Warfare Group. In the confession, Black Shadow said that the Burning Legion was Ramiro, the commander of the Burning Legion whom Qi Mulan met when he visited Africa. Then the cooperation between the two sides continued to deepen. As Emperor Dong's palace continued to develop and became a threat to Kunlun City, Gu Xingyun, the governor of Kunlun City, personally invited the Burning Legion to Tiannan and asked Ramiro to severely damage Emperor Dong's palace. Then the Burning Legion entered Tiannan and got the support of Annan State. The Burning Legion became a channel of communication between Kunlun City and Annan State. Up to now, the secret cooperation between the three parties had not stopped. In the past 2 years, Kunlun City had secretly leaked countless secrets of Jianghu State to the Burning Legion and Annan State. The confession was clear and concise. Even Lu Qing wasn't sure if this was true or not. True or false. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Guiyu had gotten the information through his own channels. In the case that no one could determine the authenticity, the photos, the confession, and these clues had to be handed in. Whether it was true or false, once these things entered the hidden Dragon Sea, they were destined to cause an extremely violent storm. Lu Qing himself was a member of the Special Warfare Group. He was the patriarch of the task force, and he was destined to be the one to hand in these things. He was standing in the center of the storm. When the winds suddenly rose, he didn't even have the room to resist. and he would be torn to pieces by the storm immediately. Lu Qing raised his head and looked at Guiyu in front of him, his eyes dull. Guiyu looked at him calmly, as if thinking about something. It was snowing heavily. The atmosphere in the courtyard suddenly became subtle. Guiyu suddenly moved his body and said with a smile, "It is said that the team leader is an expert of the thunder-shocking realm?" Lu Qing said dully, "What do you want to say?" "A little weak." Guiyu chuckled and said, "The intelligence department of the General Staff Department is full of elites. Those who can get to the position of director are at least at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. With the strength of the team leader, if he were in my place, he would at most be a section chief of a department." The corner of Lu Qing's mouth twitched. For a moment, he really wanted to kill him to keep his mouth shut. One Guiyu and a dozen or so idlers who were not welcomed by the various departments. It did not sound difficult. It was indeed not difficult. But the problem was that he was no match for Guiyu. "You caught Black Hawk?" Lu Qing asked in a low voice. "Yes, 3 days ago, we locked onto Black Hawk's whereabouts and captured him on the same day. These days, we have been secretly interrogating him. After getting his confession, I reported the news to General Yi and came here," Guiyu said calmly. Yi Dongxing was a member of Jianghu State, the deputy minister of the army headquarters, the chief of the general staff, and also the minister of the intelligence department. He could be said to be Guiyu's immediate superior. The news reached him. No matter what, it was impossible to suppress it. Lu Qing took a deep breath and said in a hoarse voice, "Where is that shadow now? Is he still in your military intelligence agency? The General Staff Department should not deal with Black Shadow." So after getting this confession, we informed the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou. The director of the Special Operations Bureau came in person and took him away when I came. Lu Qing's heart sank slightly. The Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou had always been within the sphere of influence of Kunlun City. After the Burning Legion raided Yuzhou, the former director was suspended and replaced by Drifting Cloud of Sai City. But because most of the people in the Special Operations Bureau were from Kunlun City, Drifting Cloud's work was not smooth. Since Sai City was not peaceful recently, Drifting Cloud resigned as the director of the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou and returned to Sai City with Situtsanyue. The new director of the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou was still a member of the Special Warfare Group and Gu Xinyan's confidant, named Gu Ci. The other party dared to hand Black Hawk over to the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou, which meant that he dared to hand Black Hawk over to the Special Warfare Group. What did it mean to hand over a witness who could testify that the leader of the Special Warfare Group committed treason to the Special Warfare Group? Was the other party fearless? Or were these confessions all true? Lu Qing's heart suddenly wavered. Once again, he recalled the contents of the confessions. Those contents clearly recorded Black Hawk's contact with Gu Xingyun and Qi Beizong. Some of them were even the original words. Gu Xingyun clearly expressed his uneasiness and irritation about the rise of Emperor Dong's palace. He thought of the cause of the rise of Kunlun City, but Li Tianlan, who had now reached the peak. The hatred was too deep, and there was no possibility of reconciliation. So Gu Xingyun mobilized the Burning Legion to raid Emperor Dong's palace in Tiannan? How logical it was. Lu Qing even somewhat believed it himself. After all, the special warfare system was different from others. There were too many dark sides and unseen places in it. The vague rules meant that there were too many means that could be used. And Gu Xingyun was not that kind of person. A man who was waiting for death would do something and could do something when he saw Li Tianlan and the Li family rise from the ashes. Perhaps no one in Jianghu State would not believe this. Lu Qing was suddenly shocked and shook his head subconsciously. He actually began to doubt Gu Xingyun in his heart. Doubting his own leader. He took a deep breath, held the document, looked at Guiyu, and was in a dilemma. "Leader, maybe I should remind you." Guiyu said faintly, "General Yi also has a copy of this information at this time, but this is the work of our task force. I think we should take some initiative." Lu Qing's mouth was full of bitterness. The so-called initiative was nothing more than to hand in the information before Yi Dongxing handed it over to the parliament. As a capable general of the Special Warfare Group, he had to hand in the evidence of the group's treason. This feeling was almost the same as the feeling of forcibly destroying oneself in a situation where one was unwilling to do so. But the information was already in his hands, and it was absolutely impossible not to hand it over. The only choice he could make was who to hand over the information first. Lu Qing took a deep breath, clenched the information in his hand, and said in a deep voice, "I see." Guiyu grunted and looked at him, motionless. Lu Qing was a little angry, subconsciously raised his voice, and snorted coldly, "Prepare the car, go to the Hidden Dragon Sea." The car soon stopped at the gate of the courtyard. Lu Qing hurriedly got in the car with the information. The car started. "Go to the Hidden Dragon Sea." Lu Qing said in a low voice, "Slow down, don't worry." The driver responded, and the car slowly left the courtyard. Lu Qing picked up the phone and dialed a number. It was difficult for him to directly contact Gu Xingyun at his level. He was looking for Gu Fenghua, the deputy governor of Kunlun City. "What's the matter?" Gu Fenghua's phone was quickly connected. "Governor." Lu Qing managed to calm down and said in a hoarse voice, "Something is wrong." The General Staff Department caught an important figure of the Burning Legion, and he confessed some problems related to Kunlun City. "I am now on my way to the Hidden Dragon Sea. Yi Dongxing also has a copy of the same information. You'd better tell His Highness to be mentally prepared." Gu Fenghua was silent for a long time and did not speak. Lu Qing's heart became more and more chaotic. From Gu Fenghua's silence, he seemed to have a premonition of the authenticity of the information in his hand. Suddenly, the small amount of information in his hand became more and more hot. "What information?" Gu Fenghua asked. "It's a confession and a few photos." "I'll take them and send them to you," Lu Qing said. Chapter 890. There was a soft light in the almost luxurious study. The curtains were closed. One photo after another appeared on the screen connected to the mobile phone. Obviously, the photos taken by the mobile phone were placed on the screen. The content became a little blurred, but it was still clear. Because the photos were densely packed with words, the screen played very slowly. The photos rolled slowly one by one. The last one changed from words to images. In the photo, Qi Beizong, the former director of Zhongzhou State, looked gentle and seemed to be saying something to the middle-aged man sitting in front of him. Gu Fenghua, the deputy governor of Kunlun City, sat on one side of the sofa, frowning. Gu Xingyun was facing the screen, watching all this silently, and kept silent for a long time. Yi Dongxing also has the same information, and even the original of this information is in his hands. Lu Qing has no way. I guess this information has now reached the Hidden Dragon Sea. Gu Fenghua said in a deep voice. It's ridiculous. Gu Xingyun twitched the corner of his mouth, and his voice was cold. His words showed enough confidence. Lu Qing was undoubtedly a smart man. So the confession he took with his mobile phone was all the key parts. For example, Black Hawk said that Kunlun City asked the Burning Legion to enter Tiannan to attack Emperor Dong's palace. For example, other things that Kunlun City asked the Burning Legion to do. For example, the initial contact between the Special Warfare Group and the Burning Legion. It even included some of the contents of the conspiracy between Qi Beizong and Gu Xingyun when he met them. These contents were indeed detailed enough. But in Gu Xingyun's eyes, everything was absurd to the extreme. Except that the so-called motive was correct. Everything else seemed to be off the mark. The initial contact between the Burning Legion and Kunlun City was not like this at all. As for the conversation between the man with the code name Black Hawk and Qi Beizong, it had never happened. Black Hawk said that he was the military counselor of the Burning Legion and an important figure in contact with Kunlun City on behalf of the Burning Legion. He had seen Qi Beizong, Gu Xingyun, and Gu Qianxuan more than once, and they had also planned many things together. But in fact, Gu Xingyun had never seen Black Hawk at all. He had heard of this code name. Within the Burning Legion, Black Hawk was not even a core figure of the Burning Legion. He could barely be regarded as a high-level figure who had touched the surface. Gu Xingyan's expression was a little contemptuous, and he was a little angry in his heart, but he was not flustered. He had been in contact with the Burning Legion for a long time. It was true that Kunlun City was behind the Burning Legion's entry into Tiannan. However, Gu Xingyan was absolutely sure that he would not be caught. As for the things that Lu Qing had sent over, in his opinion, they were just child's play. They were the worst kind of framing. It didn't matter whether the leaders of the parliament believed it or not. It was naturally the best if they didn't believe it. Even if they believed it, Gu Xingyan did not panic at all. In the face of the confession sent by Lu Qing, he had 10,000 ways to easily prove the innocence of Kunlun City. A farce. Gu Xingyan shook his head. There's nothing to see. Maybe it's not just a farce. Gu Fengbo lowered his head and said thoughtfully, this may be a warning. Tell me what you think. Gu Xingyan looked at the screen in front of him and said calmly. Li Tianlan has just left the desert prison. It has been less than 24 hours since then, and this information suddenly appeared. What does this mean? Gu Fengbo laughed in a low voice. No matter what, this information is very important. If it can become a reality, it is indeed very important. Gu Xingyan said coldly. Li Tianlan entered the desert prison 2 years ago because he was guilty. The information that could prove Li Tianlan's innocence was extremely important. First of all, Li Tianlan had to get a firm foothold in leaving the prison. Everything that followed, including all of his revenge, could be carried out in a logical manner. Next, if there is no accident, Li Tianlan will pour all his firepower on the Prince Group. At this time, this information is obviously a warning to us not to interfere. If the information in the information, if it's really groundless, it can only prove that from the beginning, the Southeast Group has been suspecting that the Burning Legion has something to do with Kunlun City, but there is no evidence. Now that they have taken out this information, they want us to be overwhelmed. It's hard for you and Minister Qi to fall down, but Qi Mulan must be the scapegoat this time. They want to prove from the Special Warfare Group that Li Tianlan eliminated the Qi family for the sake of the country. At the same time, they want to disgust us and warn us not to support the Prince Group. Gu Fengbo shook his head. Gu Xingyan snorted coldly. Why should Qi Mulan be the scapegoat? I can easily explain the things mentioned in the information. They can't convict me, and Qi Mulan is naturally innocent. Li Tianlan will still have a stain on him. Black Hawk, Gu Fengbo was silent for a while and said in a low voice, no one is sure how much Black Hawk knows. After all, he is a senior of the Burning Legion. Even if what he revealed can't threaten us, he himself is a variable. The Wang family of Beihai made up the so-called evidence crudely and didn't take it seriously. But who knows if they really have something? Even if what they have is far from the truth, it can still cause us great trouble. He picked up the teacup, took a sip, and said in a low voice, in fact, I think Beihai must have something, but now they have no time to care about us. Li Tianlan, Wang Xingxiao, everyone is staring at the Prince Group, and we have become secondary. Take this opportunity to clear the suspicion of the Special Warfare Group, push Qi Mulan out, and prove Li Tianlan's innocence. Then this matter will be over. The Prince Group is obviously more tempting than us now, and, he paused, and his face was a little complicated with fear. As soon as Li Tianlan left the desert, he killed First Elder with one sword strike. If, he didn't continue. Li Tianlan could kill Gu Qianchuan in a second, and naturally, he could kill Kunlun City. Even if the Special Warfare Group didn't cooperate, Li Tianlan could force Gu Xingyan to bow down. At least under that sword light, Kunlun City was now at a disadvantage in terms of strength and force in the face of Emperor Dong's palace. Now Li Tianlan and Wang Xingxiao only wanted to divide the interests of the Prince Group and didn't care about the Special Warfare Group. But if they were serious, Gu Qianchuan also appeared in the desert, and Li Tianlan had every reason to blame him. Murderous weapon, Gu Xingyan gnashed his teeth. The sword that illuminated the desert night sky spread throughout the dark world as soon as it appeared. All the superpowers came to a relatively unanimous conclusion in the shortest time. That sword light could not be explained from any point of view of martial arts. It set off from Zhongyuan, passed Yan and Zhao, entered Dongshan, flew over Yuzhou, and went straight to Beihai. From Beihai, it passed through Longjiang Province, Suzhou Province, and entered the desert in one day. When the sword light completely lit up, from Beijiang to the desert prison, the sword light drew an arc of more than 100,000 meters. More than 100,000 meters. What did that mean? It was more than 100 kilometers away. At the moment when the sword light lit up, the sword energy had torn the ambitious team, destroyed the armored core, killed Gu Qianxuan in a second, and swallowed the murderous weapon setting Sunday. During the whole process, all the superpowers in the dark world had the most accurate test. Fast. Incredibly fast. From the appearance of the sword light to the death of Gu Qianxuan. It was more than 100 kilometers away. The whole process took 0.7 seconds. What did that mean? 0.7 seconds. No one could spread their sword energy to a distance of more than 100 kilometers in such a short time. The speed far beyond the speed of sound, the unparalleled destructive power, and the almost mythical flying distance all proved one thing. That sword was not Li Tianlan's sword. It was a murderous weapon. It was an unimaginably great power produced by the combination of many murderous weapons. The most terrifying thing was that with the continuous integration of the murderous weapons, the firepower of the murderous weapons seemed to be no longer pouring out at one time. With sufficient energy, Xianyuan Feng had the conditions to use it many times. With Xianyuan Feng's sword in hand, Li Tianlan in this state was even close to Wang Tianzong in Eastern Europe. He was truly invincible in the world. Kunlun City could not afford to offend such Li Tianlan. To be exact, they could not afford to offend him now. Xianyuan Feng. The only thing they could do was to wait and retreat. The prince group was in a panic. The final battle in Beihai was about to begin. The battle was imminent. Kunlun City and even the entire dark world were looking forward to the day when Xianyuan Feng ran out of energy. Now Li Tianlan might still be terrible without the murderous weapon, but he was definitely not invincible. Gu Xingyun's facial muscles twitched, and he only felt a stuffiness in his heart. Murderous weapon. Murderous weapon again. From the rise of Kunlun City to the present, it had always been stuck in a bottleneck because of the murderous weapon. During the period when the Li family fell, the Wang family of Beihai had Wang Tianzong. With the human emperor in his hand, no one in the dark world could fight against Wang Tianzong. Gu Xingyun managed to get the setting sun for Kunlun City at the cost of serious injury, but from beginning to end, he did not even have a chance to fire. Once again, it was swallowed and integrated by Li Tianlan's Xianyuan Feng. Now, in the face of Emperor Dong's palace that was changing every day, he also did not dare to act rashly because of a murderous weapon. What was Li Tianlan without the murderous weapon? What was he? This question was actually not important. The important thing was that Li Tianlan now had a murderous weapon. And it was the strongest murderous weapon in the dark world. Gu Xingyun rubbed his temples and was about to speak. The fax machine in the study suddenly made a harsh sound. Lu Qing had sent all the complete information and photos over. This time, Gu Fengbo looked at the time and said, "Lu Qing has come out of the hidden dragon sea." He took all the information and handed it to Gu Xingyun. "It's all here." Gu Xingyun nodded, took it, and looked at it carefully. The first page of the confession was full of content that seemed to be true but was actually absurd. The second page was probably the same. Gu Xingyun casually threw the first 2 pages aside and turned to the third page. He raised his eyebrows and then frowned tightly. Then the 4th page. The study suddenly became extremely quiet. Gu Xingyun's face began to become more and more gloomy, and even a little frightened. His palm holding the information was trembling slightly. Lu Qing thought that the most important confession he had uploaded at the beginning was completely wrong. Those absurd conversations seemed to be important, but in fact, they were meaningless. But the things that Lu Qing did not send at the beginning were the real fatal things. These included the arrangement of the Burning Legion in Tiannan after accepting the invitation of Kunlun City, the way to enter Tiannan, the channels used, the approximate number of people, and the exchange of interests. And the retreat channel of the Burning Legion after the raid on Yuzhou that day. Gu Xingyun's breathing became more and more rapid. These couldn't be things that Black Hawk could access. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that everything in the confession was true. This was obviously not the intelligence handled by Black Hawk. Why did he know? Gu Xingyun gasped and suddenly threw the information in his hand into the air. Gu Fengguo was startled. When he was about to say something, the red confidential phone in the study suddenly rang. Gu Xingyun's body shook, and his face was a little pale. He moved over little by little and answered the phone. Xingyun, it's me. On the other end of the phone, Qi Beizong's low voice sounded. Gu Xingyun took a deep breath and answered. Do you know about Black Hawk? Qi Beizong asked. I just received the information, and I'm still reading it. Gu Xingyun said. Black Hawk has now been handed over to Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau. Do you know about this? Qi Beizong's voice was slow and hoarse. I know. Gu Xingyun nodded. Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau was his territory. After Drifting Cloud resigned, all the people from the director to the deputy director were his people. Qi Beizong answered. He was silent for a long time, and then whispered, Black Hawk is dead. He died less than half an hour after entering the Special Operations Bureau. Gu Xingyun answered. Then he suddenly widened his eyes and his face changed dramatically. Chapter 891. Black Eagle died. He died in Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau. The moment he heard the news, Gu Xingyun felt his blood freeze. It was as if he was suddenly covered by a big net. For the Southeast group, Black Hawk's death was meaningless to them with the mixed and false confession. But for the Special Warfare group, the death of Black Eagle meant endless trouble. Big trouble. He somehow thought of the resignation of Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau Director Drifting Cloud a few days ago. He thought that the General Staff Department would agree to hand Black Eagle over to Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau. Then Black Eagle died as soon as he entered Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau. All of this seemed like a trap. Drifting Cloud did serve as the director of Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau. But everyone knew that it was Gu Xingyun's territory. After Drifting Cloud resigned, the new director, Gu Xi, was Gu Xingyun's confidant. The entire Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau was made up of the elites of Kunlun City. From the director, the two deputy directors, the staff officer, to the middle-level officers, they were all from Kunlun City. So the whole scene looked very clear. The General Staff Department caught Black Eagle of the Burning Legion and found the evidence of treason of Kunlun City and even the leader of the Special Warfare Group. After getting the evidence, the General Staff Department handed over the criminal to Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau according to the normal procedure. The criminal with the evidence of treason of the Special Warfare Group entered the territory of the Special Warfare Group. Then he died. Well, it was that simple. What did it mean? As long as they weren't stupid, everyone would think it was to kill him. If everything recorded in the confession was a complete lie, then the death of Black Eagle didn't mean anything. But the problem was that many key clues in the confession were true. Black Eagle shouldn't have touched them, but he knew them and presented them in the confession. Even if those things were carefully handled, it was impossible to leave no clues. The most important thing was that the Burning Legion avoided the route of Yozhou's search from Yuzhou. This kind of thing couldn't be completely cleaned up. And now, the General Staff Department already knew about it, which meant that Yi Dongsheng had some clues. If Gu Xingyun cleaned it up, it would only cause more trouble. Gu Xingyun took a deep breath, and his face suddenly became extremely ugly. How did Black Eagle die? He asked in a deep voice while holding the phone. Suicide. Qi Beizong's voice was hoarse. Gu Xi has already checked his body immediately. There is no sign of poisoning, and his mind is normal. This sentence blocked most of the possibilities. Gu Xingyun rubbed his forehead and muttered to himself, "Suicide, do you believe it?" Qi Beizong asked. Gu Xingyun smiled bitterly. It was not a matter of whether he believed it or not, but whether others would believe it or not. If this matter was not handled well, it would definitely be fatal to the Special Warfare Group. Li Tianlan. Wang Xingxiao. Gu Xingyun's voice was cold and he gnashed his teeth. What a big appetite. Qi Beizong remained silent. Gu Xingyun held the phone and didn't know what to say for a while. Forget about Mulin's matter for now. After an unknown period of time, Gu Xingyun said in a low voice. Qi Beizong took a deep breath on the other end of the phone. Just from this sentence alone, he had already confirmed that not everything in the confession was a false accusation. In other words, Kunlun City and the Burning Legion were really related. Otherwise, even if the death of Black Hawk would make Kunlun City very passive, it was fake after all, and the confession could not cause too much damage to the Special Warfare Group. Qi Beizong was silent for a long time before he said in a low voice, "What are you going to do?" The corner of Gu Xingyun's mouth twitched fiercely. He gnashed his teeth and said, "Fill their appetite first." It was not until the moment of Black Hawk's death that he understood. This confession was not a warning given to him by Li Tianlan and Wang Xingxiao. This confession was a knife. A knife ready to cut the flesh of the Special Warfare Group. If Qin Fangqing lost this game, the Prince Group was bound to suffer an unprecedented blow. With the in-depth investigation of this confession, the status of the Special Warfare Group would inevitably decline again, and its strength would further shrink. How much the Special Warfare Group and the Prince Group would lose. How much Li Tianlan and the others would gain. Even if these gains were divided equally, the part Li Tianlan got could barely support the embryonic form of a group. Bang! The red confidential phone was crushed in his hand. Gu Fengbo was startled and subconsciously stood up from the sofa. "My lord, it's okay." Gu Xingyun threw the fragment in his hand to the ground. His eyes flickered and he whispered, "Just bear with him for a year." He took a deep breath and murmured, "Just a year." Golden Autumn Pavilion, Hidden Dragon Sea. The president's office was filled with smoke. The atmosphere was so oppressive that it almost solidified. Only the sound of turning pages echoed occasionally. Although Lu Qing's report had been delayed as much as possible, the information was still handed in. Although he thought his task force was a joke, Jianghu State still gave Lu Qing the right to enter the Hidden Dragon Sea at any time to show the importance it attached to this matter. And it was in this office that Lu Qing reported the information in his hand to the three most powerful counselors in Jianghu State. President Li Huaqing, Prime Minister Qin Fangqing, and Dongqing Wudi, the Minister of the Army Headquarters. At this moment, the three giants, who were completely supreme in Jianghu State, were all looking down at the confession in their hands in silence. After the first time, the three of them looked at it very carefully for the second time. Everyone's brows were tightly furrowed, their faces solemn. Yi Dongxing sat aside, sipped his tea silently, and watched the three leaders looking through the information in their hands without saying a word. He came a little later than Lu Qing, but he reported the same thing. As an insider, he was also asked to stay. In the crisp sound of the lighter, Dongqing Wudi lit another cigarette and took a deep breath. Yi Dongxing observed them calmly. As the president, Li Huaqing's emotional ups and downs were the most obvious. The confession was detailed and reasonable, and the logic was extremely clear. Yi Dongxing could clearly feel his anger. But besides the anger, he also had some doubts. It seemed that he didn't believe the content of the information. At least, he didn't believe all of it. Qin Fangqing was also reading the information. It was said that he fainted outside in the morning and suffered some flesh injuries when he met with Li Tianlan. At this time, the death of the chairman of Haoyue Group was already a hot topic. In one morning, Qin Fangqing lost his daughter, nephew, and granddaughter. The huge blow made him unable to recover at all. At this time, he sat here absent-mindedly. Although he also maintained anger, he was more worried and resentful. Yi Dongxing smiled silently. The information in his hand was submitted at the perfect time. The academics had parted ways with the Prince Group. At this time, Qin Fangqing's most powerful ally, the Special Warfare Group, was in trouble. The next counterattack could be completely focused on the Prince Group. That was probably why Qin Fangqing was worried. He looked at Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi was calm and expressionless, without any emotion. Yi Dongqing slowly lowered his head, took out a cigarette, and lit it. "What do you think?" In a somewhat ethereal voice, Li Huaqing suddenly raised his head and waved the confession in his hand. He didn't ask Dongqing Wudi. Nor did he ask Qin Fangqing. Instead, he looked directly at Yi Dongqing. Yi Dongqing was a little surprised, but then he understood. He could be said to be the first person to come into contact with this confession. At this time, of course, it was reasonable for the president to ask his opinion. "That photo doesn't prove anything," Yi Dongqing said with a smile. Li Huaqing subconsciously narrowed his eyes. Qin Fangqing raised his eyebrows in surprise. There was only one photo. It was the one where Qi Baitsong and Black Hawk met. In fact, as soon as I got the photo, I had already asked the ministry to do an identification. The identification result is very clear. The photo is fake, something that has been synthesized. Yi Dongqing said lightly, "We can't be sure if Black Hawk has met with Minister Qi, but at least there is no proof in the confession." Li Huaqing's body seemed to be a little relaxed. He said calmly, "You mean, this confession is not credible?" "Not really." Yi Dongqing's response was concise and powerful. He paused and continued, "But it is not low." "Make it clear," Qin Fangqing said slowly. His headache was getting worse recently. "There are many things in the confession that can't be confirmed for the time being. You need to talk to His Highness Gu Xingyan about this to see what the problem is. But there are some things that the comrades of the Military Intelligence Bureau of the Ministry of Intelligence have launched a preliminary investigation. One thing is certain. When the Burning Legion attacked Yuzhou, someone in the Special Warfare Group did provide them with convenience during the evacuation. This clue is very important. At present, we have secretly controlled several key figures." Yi Dongqing said slowly, "It's just that this case is very sensitive. After knowing this, I have temporarily stopped the investigation. If I continue to investigate, no one knows who will be involved. I hope the Parliament can give me enough authorization and trust, or we can pretend that we don't know that someone in the Special Warfare Group committed treason." Hearing this, not only Qin Fangqing, but also Li Huaqing had no way out. He opened his mouth and glanced at Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi's expression was calm. "Pretend that we don't know? Are we going to let the vermin continue to destroy the good situation? Investigate, we must investigate. No matter who is involved, we must investigate to the end." The corner of Qin Fangqing's mouth twitched, and he did not speak. Li Huaqing's face was as calm as water. He nodded slowly and said, "I agree with Minister Dongqing. We must investigate, and we must investigate it strictly. I need the formal authorization of the Parliament," Yi Dongqing said, without looking at Qin Fangqing. Li Huaqing nodded and gestured to Dongqing Wudi. "Okay." Dongqing Wudi said slowly, "From now on, a special task force will be set up to investigate the problems of the Special Warfare Group. I will be the team leader, and you will be the standing director. You can mobilize the personnel of the Military Intelligence Bureau, the Ministry of Security, the Police Department, various troops, and the Special Operations Bureau everywhere to join the task force. My only requirement is to be fast. We must find out the vermin in the Special Warfare Group as soon as possible." "I understand." Yi Dongqing nodded and glanced at Qin Fangqing. His eyes were full of meaning. Qin Fangqing took a deep breath and rubbed his head, which seemed to be splitting, with a gloomy face. He knew very well. If his daughter's death was just the revenge of Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai against him, then the information in front of him was the beginning of the official counterattack of the Southeast Group and the Giant Group. He had no way out. Chapter 892. Zhongzhou State. Even in the entire Dark World, Sai City could be said to be the most special one among all the forces with invincible realm experts. The Wang family of Beihai didn't need to say more. The Li family was also prosperous before it collapsed. After the breakthrough of Nirvana Sword Master Wei Kunlun, Mount Shu had been making continuous moves in the past 2 years and had a stronger and stronger ruling power in the southwest of Jianghu state. What was the invincible realm? Whether it was the peak of the invincible realm or the ordinary invincible realm, there was no difference in the eyes of most people in the Dark World. This realm originally represented the peak of the Dark World and the peak of personal strength. Mysterious, majestic, and irresistible. Therefore, every invincible realm expert would have his own sphere of influence, his own development foundation, his own right to speak, and a transcendent status that could match his realm. Sai City could be said to be Situ Tsangyue's sphere of influence. But she had almost never developed any force. As for the right to speak, Situ Tsangyue had never expressed any opinion on anything inside Jianghu state. The status of the hidden god of Jianghu state was indeed transcendent, but most of the time, Situ Tsangyue was transcendent as if she didn't exist. She would only show up occasionally when Jianghu state asked her to do something. Over time, most people in Jianghu state seemed to have forgotten Sai City. And Sai City also forgot Jianghu state. After tribulation broke through, Sai City already had 2 invincible realm experts. In terms of high-end strength, Sai City was the second force in Jianghu state, second only to the Wang family of Beihai. But even so, Sai City had not developed much in the past few years. This famous city of assassins in the Dark World had always maintained an absolutely aloof and indifferent attitude, as if it had no interest in the outside world. So compared with the forces with invincible realm experts, Sai City was the smallest even compared with the large forces in Jianghu state. It was far less than Mount Shu. It was far less than Jade Pool. Even Azura Path, which had been suppressed by Sai City these years, had a lot more people than Sai City. There were less than 800 combatants. Cooks, logistics, the families of a few combatants, there were less than 2,000 people in total. This was also the number of permanent residents in Sai City. With less than 800 combatants, it was even less than some medium-sized martial arts forces. Because of this, when the army of Snow Country made abnormal moves on the other side of Mount Taibai, Sidu Tsangyue had to return to Sai City from Yuzhou and keep an eye on the situation of Snow Country. The anomaly at the border had started on the day of the lockdown, and it had been more than 24 hours since then. Snow Country mobilized 2 border legions and slowly approached Sai City. There were about 20,000 soldiers in each of the 2 legions. Immediately, some organizations in the Snow Country Special Warfare System began to join the army. So far, Sai City had not collected detailed relevant information, so it could only guard the border of Mount Taibai. The wind was biting cold. The icy wind blew the snow on Mount Taibai. Snow fluttered in the air, and the world was a blur. Situ Tsangyue stood expressionlessly on a hillside, gazing at the Snow Empire military camp in the distance. This was the most typical mountainous environment. The terrain was steep and complex, and the undulating peaks were covered with snow. The harsh terrain formed the border between the 2 countries. Most of the time, the border between the 2 countries did not even need to be guarded by soldiers. This terrain also meant that even if there was a war between Jianghu State and Snow Country, it was unlikely that there would be a large-scale battle between soldiers in this area. The snow, the peaks, and the rugged mountain roads were enough to make most infantry powerless. If this place became a battlefield, the most likely outcome would be firepower coverage or airdrop tactics. Situ Tsangyue watched all this silently. Looking at the shining light in the distant military camp, she was silent for a long time. She knew very well what the purpose of the Snow Country Army, which was separated by mountains and snow a few kilometers away, was. She also knew what Jianghu State's attitude toward this matter was. The Snow Country Army on the opposite side. To put it bluntly, it was Wang Xiaoyao's force. Wang Xiaoyao was controlling the Dark World and the entire special warfare system of Snow Country step by step. In 2 years, his strength had expanded extremely rapidly. Wang Xiaoyao and Wang Qinglei were partners. Wang Qinglei and Chen Fangqing were partners. Obviously, Wang Xiaoyao wanted to use the power of Snow Country to drag her, and even the entire Sai City, here. The timing was delicate. The location was also delicate. In such a complex and harsh environment, Zhongzhou State did not have to worry that the army of Snow Country would invade Zhongzhou State. Moreover, there was Wang Xiaoyao's guarantee, which was equal to double insurance. Chen Fangqing also hoped that Situ Canyue would stay in Sai City, so he would not take any action, nor would he provide them with support. Slight footsteps stepped on the snow on the ground, and he slowly walked behind Situ Canyue. Governor. Drifting Cloud's voice sounded. Situ Canyue answered. I think I understand why Minister Dongqing suggested me to resign a few days ago. Drifting Cloud glanced at the military camp in front and whispered with a smile. Situ Canyue stared into the distance, took a deep breath, and turned to look at him. What do you mean? Something happened to the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou, and it's big trouble. Zhongzhou State now has the news that the Special Warfare Group has committed treason. The cause of this matter is the General Staff Department. The General Staff Department caught an important figure of the Burning Legion. He confessed a lot of things, and some evidence has been found. The witness was killed when he was handed over to the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou. Drifting Cloud's voice was a little playful. Situ Canyue was stunned and asked subconsciously, silencing him? Who knows? Drifting Cloud lowered his head and whispered, the General Staff Department should have reported this matter to Minister Dongqing in advance, so the minister asked me to resign. If there is no accident, in the next few days, the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou will be replaced. Gu Ci will not end well, and the entire Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou will probably be replaced. Situ Canyue was silent for a while and whispered, do you want to go back? Drifting Cloud, who had resigned as the director of the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou a few days ago, looked at her seriously. I'm waiting for your decision. Situ Canyue's body stiffened for a moment. She knew very well what Drifting Cloud was talking about. He had said this so-called decision once a few years ago. This was not a decision about Drifting Cloud's position. It was a decision about the future of Sai City. His Highness Li Tianlan's return this time is bound to start a new group. Saint told you this before, and now the conditions are met. The Prince Group, the Special Warfare Group, and everything they lost can become the framework of His Highness Li Tianlan's new group. Drifting Cloud said calmly, in this case, what role should Sai City play in the new group? Should it continue to stay in Mount Taibai, or should it have another direction? Situ Canyue looked at the wind and snow in front of her. The wind and snow were messy, passing through her sight. At that moment, it seemed that many years had passed. There were few people in Sai City. But it had a super strong cohesion that most forces did not have. Situ Canyue was in the invincible realm. Tribulation was also in the invincible realm. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud were superiors of the half-step invincible realm. There were 7 superiors above the thunder-shocking realm in Sai City. There were nearly 100 assassins above the stabilization phase of the fire-flaming realm in Sai City. For today's Emperor Dong's palace, this was definitely an absolutely powerful force. It was also a force that could be digested by the current scale of Emperor Dong's palace. If Situ Canyue did not intend to change anything, Sai City would still be Sai City. But if Sai City wanted to change its direction and play a more important role in the new group controlled by Li Tianlan, Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud, the other 5 thunder-shocking realm assassins of Sai City, dozens of fire-flaming realm experts, all of them could find their own positions in the new group. Situ Canyue lowered her head slightly and stared at the snow in front of her. The stunning sword in the 13-story building was still standing there, as if it was also staring at Situ Canyue. Drifting Cloud looked ahead and opened his mouth. When he was about to say something, his eyes suddenly froze. His line of sight crossed a few kilometers ahead. In the wind and snow, in front of the shining gate of the barracks, a group of about hundreds of soldiers of Snow Country roared and rushed forward for a distance. At the forefront, a tall soldier held the flag of his legion and ran for hundreds of meters. Then he inserted the flag in the snow again. In the vision of an expert, a half-step to invincible realm, Drifting Cloud clearly saw that the flagrant military flag crossed the boundary monument of Jianghu state. The flag crossed the boundary monument in a short distance. It was even less than 1 meter. But the distance of dozens of centimeters was indeed the territory of Jianghu state. Drifting Cloud's face was livid, and he suddenly raised his hand. Suddenly, a dark blue electric arc lit up in the air where the snow was fluttering. The electric arc extended for hundreds of meters in the air and finally disappeared without a trace. A burst of indistinct laughter suddenly rang out. In his sight, the soldier of Snow Country holding the Legion flag gave a thumbs up to Drifting Cloud and Situ Xianxia, and then he pointed it down fiercely. He laughed and pulled out the flag. Once again, he rushed forward for tens of meters and directly inserted the flag in the snow of Jianghu state. A ghastly cry and wolf howl came from afar. Situ Xianxia looked at this scene expressionlessly. Bang! In the dull sound, a cannonball suddenly shot out from the small weapons base of Sai City, giving a warning. The soldiers of Snow Country took a step back, and then the ghastly cry and wolf howl became louder. The huge sound wave of hundreds of people successfully attracted the attention of the Snow Country barracks behind. More and more soldiers left the barracks and came over. The cannonball landed on the land 5 kilometers away from the army of Snow Country, making a loud noise. The rear of the Snow Country barracks instantly lit up with bright fire. Several huge cannonballs with burning tail flames crossed the sky and headed straight for Sai City. The cannonball flew in the air and finally exploded a large amount of snow at the foot of the mountain less than 1 kilometer away from Situ Xianxia. Drifting Cloud could even clearly feel the violent vibration of the ground. Drifting Cloud's face was livid. He gritted his teeth and spat out a swear word after a long while, F***ck. Situ Xianxia's eyes narrowed tightly. The world seemed to be tense for a moment. A cold and awe-inspiring voice rang out in the midst of the snowstorm. Scram! The voice of the invincible realm expert spread into the mountains, through the wind and snow, and directly echoed in the barracks of Snow Country. Situ Xianxia was responded by 2 cannonballs. The artillery roared. This time, the landing point of the artillery moved forward another 200 meters. This landing point was less than 100 meters away from the real edge of Sai City. F***ck, Governor, Qing Feng and I will kill our way over. Drifting Cloud suddenly took a step forward. No matter how calm he was, he couldn't stand this kind of provocation. In the past 20 years, Sai City had indeed stood aloof from the world, but who really dared to provoke them? Drifting Cloud couldn't stand this kind of arrogance. Don't be impulsive. Situ Xianxia shook her head. They just want us to rush over. Sai City is afraid of them? Drifting Cloud sneered and said, they are just clowns. How many people in Snow Country can be a match for Qing Feng and me? There may not be many individuals, but there is an army in front of us. Even if we can beat them back, their artillery is enough to destroy Sai City. Besides, they can withdraw from the national border at any time. If there is a dispute at that time, it is tantamount to making trouble for Tianlan. Situ Xianxia said calmly, ignore them. As long as I'm still here, they won't dare to act rashly. Since Tianlan has come out, we don't need to worry about the outside world. If they want to delay, let them. Drifting Cloud looked at the barracks opposite with a cold expression and said nothing. There were more and more soldiers of Snow Country in front of the military flag. A large number of soldiers of Snow Country stood blatantly on the land of Jianghu state, shouting and swearing. The language of Snow Country was mixed with English and a few words of poor Chinese. They were laughing and joking, but the content was full of the most vicious curses. Bitch, whore, all kinds of obscenities came along with the wind and snow. Situ Xianxia took a deep breath, and her expression became colder. She quietly clenched her fists. Buzz! The startling sword, which had been standing in front of Situ Xianxia, suddenly trembled and made a buzz. The sound was with clear excitement and desire. Boom! Another row of cannonballs came from the barracks of Snow Country. The fiery red light penetrated the wind and snow. Looking at the landing point, this row of cannonballs would almost certainly fall on the edge of Sai City. Situ Xianxia suddenly looked up, and her pupils contracted. Her clenched fists trembled slightly, and she raised them for a moment. Her body, which was about to make a move, suddenly stiffened, and her face changed. An extremely fierce wind suddenly appeared over Sai City. The wind blew the snow. In an instant, there was a mighty and indescribable storm between heaven and earth. The whole world seemed to be suddenly quiet in an instant. Snowflakes fluttered. The fiery red light dragged by the cannonball disappeared almost instantly. Then the cannonball with great destructive power completely disintegrated. Situ Xianxia suddenly raised her head and looked ahead with an extremely solemn face. Drifting Cloud was stunned. He opened his mouth, but suddenly found that he could not make a sound. The world became extremely quiet. The world was originally quiet. The sound of the fierce wind had already disappeared. But there was an extremely heavy airflow between heaven and earth. The airflow filled the world and turned into a silent gale. The gale rolled up the flying snow and turned into a storm. The storm did not seem to move fast. Or it did not move at all. Because the moment the storm formed, it had already filled the whole world. The crazy dancing snowflakes filled the sky, filled the valley, and occupied everything in sight. The silent wind. The flying blood. They covered the sky and covered the earth as they spun. Everything in Sai City was surrounded by the storm. Neither Situ Xianxia nor Drifting Cloud could see the beginning or the end of the storm. Only the startling sword continued to vibrate, producing sword chimes one after another. Situ Xianxia raised her head and looked at the swirling wind and snow in front of her, as if she was looking at a rotating world. Everywhere she looked, there was a vast expanse of white. There was no sound. In the state of extreme silence, the swirling snowflakes that filled the world seemed to gradually change color. The color deepened little by little and gradually faded. It seemed to be a light pink, then turned into a slight red, and finally became an extremely dazzling scarlet. All the snowflakes turned into a shocking red. The strong smell of blood rose on the extremely quiet Blood Mountain, which was extremely strange. Abruptly, the storm, which seemed to have been dyed red by blood, seemed to stop rotating. The speed of the storm was getting slower and slower. In the light footsteps, a figure passed through the storm and walked to Situ Xianxia. He carried a soldier of Snow Country who had fainted in his hand and said with a smile, "Aunt Situ, long time no see." Chapter 893. Situ Xianxia stared blankly at the figure coming out of the storm. The bloody storm between heaven and earth had solidified. His pace was neither fast nor slow. As if nothing had happened, he did it as if it were light and understated. This was an indescribable casualness and indifference. She heard him call her Aunt Situ. That face was still so familiar. But in Situ Xianxia's heart, he seemed to be a completely different person. He might still be him. But in more than 2 years, whether it was spirit, mentality, or martial arts, he seemed to have transformed and sublimated to another level. "Tianlan," she called out subconsciously. Li Tianlan nodded and threw the soldier of Snow Country to the ground. The soldier was majestic and burly, wearing a neat military uniform. Judging from his rank, he was a general. At this time, he was lying on the ground like a dead pig, silent. Li Tianlan looked down at him and fell silent. He didn't speak. The world became dead silent in an instant. The indescribable bloody storm seemed to be slowing down. It also seemed to be accelerating. The rotation of the storm became more and more blurred, as if it was too fast or too slow, and finally became a state of complete stillness. There was only a still blood red in front of Drifting Cloud. The pungent smell of blood filled the air like water. The red in front of him occupied everything in sight. The snow was gone. The mountains were gone. The valley was gone. All he could see was this still red. He couldn't hear any sound, and he couldn't see the opposite barracks. In the indescribable silence, Drifting Cloud's chest became more and more stuffy, and he only felt that his whole body became heavier and heavier. In a trance, the still storm seemed to make the first roar. It was a very familiar sound. It was like a strong wind blowing up the snow. Snowflakes were flying in the air, like white catkins all over the sky. Drifting Cloud stared at the still red in front of him. The still red began to rotate again, faster and faster, with an extremely sharp sound. The almost dark red began to fade, mixed with white, and rotated wildly. Li Tianlan still stood, silently looking down at the unconscious general of Snow Country at his feet. The faintly discernible sword chi kept vibrating around him. The bloody storm became thinner and thinner with the vibration of the sword energy. Faintly, Drifting Cloud saw the valleys and peaks blocked by the bloody storm. The smell of blood began to surge. The bloody storm became more and more chaotic. White snow. The red blood spread wildly in all directions. The process seemed slow, but it was also extremely fast. It seemed to only take a breath's time. The storm was gone. The red that filled the sky also disappeared. The silence turned into silence. Lu Yun subconsciously took a deep breath and looked at his surroundings. They were still standing in the same place. There was no change in the snow mountain. The valley remained unchanged. Sai City remained unchanged. Lu Yun looked at everything that was familiar to him and, his eyes suddenly froze. An incomprehensible emotion arose in his eyes, and it transformed into astonishment, shock, absurdity, and finally a wisp of indescribable terror. His body stiffened on the spot, like a petrified statue. The sound of rapid and heavy breathing came out from the side of his mouth. His eyes were open to the widest, staring in the direction of the Snow Empire military camp. In his line of sight, the boundary monument was still there. The flag of Snow Country Corps on the land of Jianghu State was still there. The military camp of Snow Country was still brightly lit. Lu Yun recalled the blood-colored storm. He had thought that after the storm, he would see countless corpses, a large scene of suffering, and Li Tianlan's current strength. But, no, there was nothing. He didn't see the corpses or the wounded. It was quiet on Mount Taibai. Everything in sight was white snow. No corpses, no wounded, no army, no army. No army. The military camp of Snow Country was still there. But in that quiet storm, all the creatures in the Snow Empire's military camp had completely disappeared. It was as if they had never existed. Lu Yun opened his mouth, like a dying fish. All this was beyond his imagination, even if he was a superior a half-step to invincible realm. A subtle sound rang in the valley. In an instant, the sword energy that seemed to cover the world began to gather toward Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan, who had been quiet, moved and breathed out softly. Situ Xianxia took a deep look at Li Tianlan. Compared with Lu Yun, she naturally knew the power of that sword move better. That was really tearing everything apart. At that moment, the area covered by the storm became the domain of sword energy. Pure sword energy. Countless strands of sword chi surged within the domain. Every strand of sword chi collided with other strands of sword chi countless times. The sword chi shattered into even smaller strands of sword chi. The vast sword energy completely tore the corpses of the soldiers of Snow Country, leaving no trace of their existence. No, there might still be traces, but all the blood had been covered by snow. There were 2 legions and several elites of Snow Country from the Special Warfare Agency. This kind of sword energy, as far as Situ Xianxia knew, there seemed to be only one person who could do it. Wang Tianzong. It was Wang Tianzong before Eastern Europe. This was the power that faintly surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. But she was an invincible realm superior and could roughly feel Li Tianlan's state. Whether it was his age or his actual performance, he didn't seem to have really entered the invincible realm. So how did he do it? Situ Xianxia quietly looked at Li Tianlan, who was motionless. She was a little relieved, but also inexplicably upset. Your Highness, Lu Yun finally came back to his senses and stammered. Why are you here? Situ Xianxia smiled and said, it's not urgent here. No, it's urgent. Li Tianlan shook his head. He slowly moved his arm. Crack, in an instant, the sound of countless joints vibrating came out of Li Tianlan's body. His face turned pale for a moment. In Lu Yun's sight, he clearly saw a shocking bloodstain on Li Tianlan's arm. Li Tianlan's skin suddenly began to break at some point, spreading to his 5 fingers, palms, back of hands, wrists, and even to the invisible place in his sleeves. One of his arms was like broken glass, densely packed and full of cracks for a while. Situ Xianxua's eyes suddenly froze. Li Tianlan looked at his arm expressionlessly. This was the hand that held the sword. His cracked palm slowly clenched into a fist. Fresh blood flowed down his chest and palms, falling onto the snowy ground. It was a ghastly sight. I'm fine. He said in a low voice. Situ Xianxua did not speak. She stared at his palm, and her eyes trembled slightly. The blood dripping quickly became less and less. There seemed to be a dense mist in Li Tianlan's palm. Large patches of blood and dense cracks began to become blurred in the mist. Li Tianlan's body slowly relaxed and kicked the general of Snow Country under his feet. The general groaned and opened his eyes blankly. His memory was still stuck just now. He was just ordering the artillery of the barracks to fire again when he was suddenly pulled by a hand. When he woke up, he was here. Where was this place? The general was slightly shocked and suddenly got up. He saw Li Tianlan, Situ Xianxua, and Drifting Cloud, as well as his empty and silent barracks. Where's my army? He said subconsciously and finally realized where he was. It didn't matter where he was. What mattered was who was beside him. The general's face was pale and he took a step forward subconsciously. A subtle sound was heard accompanied by screams. Countless densely packed sword chi enveloped everything around the general. He took a step forward and his body directly hit a large piece of sword energy. The sword energy went deep into his body. In an instant, his military uniform was directly dyed red with blood. The general howled wildly, and his eyes were filled with pain and fear. Name. Li Tianlan lowered his head and looked at him condescendingly. Takov, no, the general answered in a trembling voice. Countless sword energy went deep into his body and did not seem to disappear at all. Instead, they were destroying his flesh and blood bit by bit as if they were alive. The unprepared encounter almost crushed his will at once. It's too long, I can't remember. Li Tianlan said lightly, just call him Tatev, it's Takov. The general groaned in his heart, but his Chinese was a little bad, and he was not in the mood to explain anything. His body curled up and kept trembling under the pain. Your army has crossed the boundary. Li Tianlan looked at him and said quietly. Yes, yes. General Takov shouted. He wanted to raise his voice, but his words were extremely weak. I'm willing to apologize, on behalf of my army. Who do you think you are? Li Tianlan looked at him silently. Your apology is worthless. He reached out and grabbed Takov's bloody body, pointing to the flag of Snow Country that was still stuck in the snow of Jianghu state. Did you see it? Li Tianlan asked. Yes, yes. Takov nodded frantically. His legs gradually became wet, and a suspicious liquid flowed down his trousers. Now contact your boss. Li Tianlan's voice was low and gloomy. Before dark, there must be a person who can represent Snow Country. The president, the prime minister, your defense general, anyone. Ask him to come here, pull out your flag from the land of Jianghu state, and make a public apology. Otherwise, within half a month, I will personally put the star flag of Jianghu state in front of the gate of your capital. He paused and looked at Takov. Do you understand? Yes, I understand. Takov kept nodding. Li Tianlan casually threw him to the ground and said calmly, I'm here waiting for your country's apology. Drifting Cloud's body trembled, and he did not dare to speak for a while. Situ Xianxia took a deep breath and suddenly laughed. At this moment, she seemed to have made up her mind. Chapter 894. General Tarkov, whose full name was unknown, tremblingly took out his mobile phone. It was obvious that the general of Snow Country stationed at the border was frightened, and his voice trembled when he called his superior. Li Tianlan didn't understand Russian and didn't bother to listen to what he was talking about on the phone. He just reached out and touched the hilt of the startling sword, as if saying hello. The startling sword trembled slightly, and the hilt rubbed against Li Tianlan's palm. It looked very happy. It's hard for the representatives of Snow Country to come before dark. Situ Xianxia looked at Li Tianlan and said softly. To some extent, Snow Country's bureaucracy in some aspects could be said to be the most serious in the world. The story of destroying 2 legions in a storm outside Sai City was indeed shocking enough. But Snow Country, as one of the toughest nations in the world, could hardly be completely subdued because of this. They might compromise, but Li Tianlan didn't leave any room for compromise. Li Tianlan's requirement was that before dark, the president, prime minister, or the defense general of Snow Country should apologize in person, walk to the border of Jianghu state, and take their flag back. Even if the high-level individuals would be frightened by Li Tianlan, the army of Snow Country couldn't bear this kind of humiliation. It was equivalent to an outsider asking Jianghu state to make Li Huaqing, Chen Fangqing, or Dongqing Wudi apologize and pull out the flag planted by their own soldiers. This was a great humiliation. So in Situ Xianxia's view, not only before dark, the 3 giants of Snow Country might not come back at all. Even more exaggeratedly, the news wouldn't reach the ears of the 3 giants in a short time. I know. Li Tianlan said quietly. Situ Xianxia answered with some doubts. So I gave them half a month. Li Tianlan said slowly, even if I have shown enough strength, it's easy for them to focus on other places. The chaos in Beihai is close at hand. It's normal that the military camp of Snow Country doesn't retreat and the high-level officials of Snow Country don't come, because they are waiting for the end of Beihai. And the state of your sword? Situ Xianxia said calmly. He destroyed 2 legions with 1 sword strike. Even if it was an army formed by 2 groups of people, such destructive power was enough to make people feel like their guts were being torn apart. But in comparison, this sword was still inferior to the sword light that could reach tens of thousands of meters in an instant in the desert. The theory that Li Tianlan's strength was based on murderous weapons was very popular in the dark world. So even without the 2 legions, Snow Country would still attribute this to the power of Xianyuan Feng. And in the chaotic battle in North Sea, Xianyuan Feng's energy would inevitably be consumed quickly, or even completely exhausted. Without energy, Xianyuan Feng was just an invincible godly weapon. Naturally, Li Tianlan's state was flawed. I don't care about that. Li Tianlan shook his head. Your Highness, you just said that you will wait here for the higher-ups of Snow Empire. Lu Yun tried his best to calm down. His smile was a little stiff, and his voice was a little cautious. Yes. Li Tianlan said, that way, I can ask for more compensation from them in half a month. Because I waited for them for the whole afternoon. Situ Xianxia looked at Li Tianlan in a daze. After a long while, she suddenly reached out and touched his head. Li Tianlan laughed. He might not be handsome, but his young and clean face was confident and warm when he smiled, like the sunshine in the flying snow. He silently looked at the empty and silent camp of Snow Country and was silent for a while. Everything that happened here today would not be meaningless. All the losses of Snow Country would be counted on Wang Xiaoyao. Wang Xiaoyao now controlled the dark world of Snow Country, but he only cooperated with the higher-ups of Snow Country. Perhaps he occupied a dominant position, but he was far from being able to do whatever he wanted. Half a month. Li Tianlan was going to use this half a month to end everything at present. Half a month later, he would let the whole dark world have his voice. He gently tapped on the hilt of graceful sword and found that the general of Snow Country had hung up the phone and looked at him with a little nervous eyes. As a general of Snow Country, he obviously knew the situation of his country better than anyone else. So he collapsed on the snow with blood all over his body, and there was some despair in his eyes. The result? Li Tianlan said casually. Takov tried his best to smile. His smile was uglier than crying. He was promoted to the military rank last year and was not from Zhongzhou State. He didn't know Li Tianlan and didn't know how to call him, so he could only skip this step and said directly, No, my boss said he would report this to the president. His voice was a little trembling. But, no buts. Li Tianlan shook his head. You can kneel here before the people of Snow Country come. Countless visible sword energy intertwined in front of him and spread upward quickly. Takov's face was pale, and he subconsciously propped up his upper body. The sword energy went straight from his chest to the top of his head. He remained kneeling and was completely shrouded by the sword energy. In this case, as long as his body moved more than 5 centimeters, his whole body would be cut into countless pieces by the sword energy. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and looked at Sai City behind him. Auntie, let's go back and talk. His voice was a little deep. Okay. Situ Xianxia nodded. Have you had lunch? I'll have someone prepare it. He gave Lu Yun a wink. Lu Yun nodded and quickly turned to arrange lunch. Not yet. I heard that the snow chicken here is good. I'll try it later. Li Tianlan said with a smile. Situ Xianxia gently raised the corner of her mouth. Her eyebrows and eyes were curved like crescent moons, and the thin crow's feet showed at the corners of her eyes. She was extremely beautiful and kind. It's a little late. I'll cook for you next time. Okay. Li Tianlan smiled but did not move. Situ Xianxia finally realized something. Her expression was a little dignified. Now I'm fine. Li Tianlan said softly. He stood where he was and moved his body slightly. The range of that kind of movement was too small, even smaller than a slight tremble. It seemed that he had been standing where he was. Situ Xianxia's eyes were a little worried. She suddenly said, I'll carry you on my back. No need. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and suddenly took a step forward. Sizzle, in the slight sound, it seemed that something was breaking, and the liquid was squeezed out. Li Tianlan, who was expressionless, suddenly frowned. A lot of blood came out from his body in an instant. Li Tianlan's face grew paler. Blood soaked his whole body in an instant. Under the cover of the black windbreaker, Situ Xianxia could only see a small part of his trousers stained with blood and his chest that was not covered by the windbreaker. Li Tianlan raised the corner of his mouth, and the short syllable became a little distorted. Situ Xianxia tightly pursed her lips. After a while, she said hoarsely, Your body is too fragile. This is the price of invincibility. Li Tianlan whispered. It seemed that because of the pain, his voice was a little gloomy. But it's not unbearable. He slowly stepped forward. The blood became more and more as he moved. Li Tianlan left a very obvious bloodstain on the road he walked. And for me, such a price is not unbearable. There was no way for him to enter the invincible realm at this age. He could only take another path. Unorthodox way. Unorthodox way. Whatever it was, he was now indeed standing at the peak of personal force in the dark world. He would pay a little price. But he had the dragon vein, and his body's amazing recovery ability was enough to suppress this price to a bearable range. For Li Tianlan, as long as he could bear it, there was no price. He walked faster and faster. Wisps of dense mist gradually spread from his arms to his whole body. He walked in the snow all over the mountain, and his body became more and more blurred. At nearly 2:00 in the afternoon, the wounds on Li Tianlan's body had completely healed. His aura was still a little weak, but it was recovering every moment. He took a shower in the room used for entertaining guests and changed his clothes. A sumptuous lunch had been prepared in the small restaurant of Sai City. The high-level officials of Sai City gathered together and waited quietly for Li Tianlan. Situ Xianxia introduced everyone to Li Tianlan very seriously. Cool breeze, drifting cloud, and deep dream could all be said to be acquaintances. In addition, there were 4 experts above the thunder-shocking realm in Sai City. Huiyue, a petite and silent assassin at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Wildfire, an assassin at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm who was born in Azura Path but took the initiative to join Sai City. Wukong was the oldest and the first to follow Situ Xianxia. Nowadays, he seldom went down the mountain and played the role of the butler of Sai City. The other one was not present, but Li Tianlan was most familiar with her. She was Du Hanyin, who was a latecomer among the several veteran assassins of Sai City. There was also a thunder-shocking realm assassin who died in Europe more than a year ago. Now, in front of Li Tianlan was the top lineup of Sai City. Of course, Li Tianlan still remembered another name of Sai City. That was also the purpose of his coming here today. Li Tianlan shook hands with everyone and then sat in the main seat that Situ Xianxia intentionally or unintentionally left for him. He didn't say much and just began to eat quietly. There was no wine on the table, and no one who was good at talking, so the atmosphere was a little dull, but not solemn. Li Tianlan didn't put down his bowl and chopsticks until everyone slowed down. He looked at the crowd and said slowly, "In a short time, Snow Country won't come to apologize, but they won't continue to send troops here." No one spoke and looked at Li Tianlan attentively. Li Tianlan gently knocked on the table and said in a low and soft tone, "I have one thing that I need your help with." "Go ahead." Situ Xianxia smiled softly. "I have no problem with going to Beihai with your highness. I believe everyone here will." Cool Breeze said with a smile, including Wukong, the old guy. Wukong, whose hair was a little gray, smiled. He looked at Li Tianlan and said softly, "I can still move my old bones. If your highness needs me, just say the word. I also miss the days when I fought side by side with your highness." Deep Dream laughed and seemed to recall the time in East Island. "I have no problem." Radiant Moon and Wildfire spoke at the same time. "Not to Beihai. I can solve the problem in Beihai by myself." Li Tianlan took a deep look at them and said quietly. Situ Xianxia raised her eyebrows and said nothing. Li Tianlan lowered his eyelids, knocked on the table, and said slowly, "I hope Sai City can go to East Island." His voice was as soft as the wind. But in Situ Xianxia's ears, it was like a clap of thunder. Her smile froze for a moment, and it seemed a little unnatural. All the people present were top assassins. They almost instantly caught the change in Situ Xianxua's expression. The dining table became quiet. Li Tianlan calmly took a sip of tea and said nothing. It was certain that East Island's Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace would participate in the final battle in Beihai. Not only the 2 major martial arts sects of East Island, but also Beihai, to be exact, the southern area of Beihai province. East Island was determined to get it this time. In their eyes, that was their land. So all the intelligence showed that in the special warfare system of East Island, personnel were transferred frequently, and it was clear that they intended to go all out to destroy the Wang family of Beihai. Under such circumstances, East Island was bound to be empty again. Just like in the final battle in Heaven Capital 5 years ago. The old things seemed to be reincarnated again. It was the same situation. 5 years ago, a considerable number of experts from East Island were trapped in Jianghu State, including 2 invincible realm grandmasters from East Island. And this time, 2 invincible realm grandmasters of East Island were about to be involved in Beihai. The only difference was that Li Tianlan was not qualified to fight for anything 5 years ago. But now, 5 years later, he wanted the right to speak in the dark world of East Island. Li Tianlan was qualified to fight for anything, and any resources. Emperor Dong's palace was rooted in Tiannan and would gradually spread to the entire Southeast Asia. Although East Island was small, it was enough to be a barrier for Emperor Dong's palace in some aspects. The 5 countries in Eastern Europe were the foundation laid by Li Tianlan. The military flag movement gave Li Tianlan a reason to intervene in Snow Country. The 5 countries in Eastern Europe gradually established contact with the Dark Knights in Northern Europe. The treason conspiracy of the Special Warfare Group could also allow Li Tianlan to gradually replace Kunlun City. Jianghu State, Southeast Asia, East Island, Eastern Europe, Northern Europe. Li Tianlan could fight for everything. As long as he had enough time to digest all these, Emperor Dong's palace would become the real overlord of the Dark World. This was the era of Dong Huang. There might be obstacles in front of Li Tianlan. But after Mormon's eternal sword, there was no insurmountable mountain in front of him. Everything he wanted was no longer a future that he could look forward to. But now was the time. If he wanted it, he would get it. East Island was determined to get Beihai. Li Tianlan was determined to get East Island. It was a race against time. So he wanted to go to Sai City. Not only Sai City. Mount Shu, which could not intervene in the final battle of Beihai, would also go there. Situtsangyue. Wei Kunlun. He wanted the only 2 invincible realm experts in Jianghu State to completely overturn East Island. Li Tianlan picked up the cup in front of him and drank some water. He turned his head and looked at Situtsangyue quietly. Situtsangyue said nothing. She looked at Li Tianlan with a pale face. Li Tianlan looked away. His expression grew calmer. Chapter 895. The atmosphere seemed to have dropped to a freezing point. Everyone could feel the stalemate at the dining table. Li Tianlan held the cup and tapped it thoughtfully. His expression was as calm as water and he said nothing. Situtsangyue slightly lowered her head and also said nothing. Cool breeze and drifting clouds seemed somewhat nervous. They sat there motionlessly, not making any unnecessary movements. Deep Dream wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. In the end, she did not speak. Sai City was definitely willing to accept Li Tianlan's order. And the interior of East Island would become empty as the final battle of Beihai progressed. Sai City, Mount Shu. In today's dark world, in terms of high-end force, the combination of the 2 forces would not be weaker than any superpower in its heyday. The hidden god of Jianghu State, the Nirvana Sword Master. 2 invincible realm experts. Qing Feng, Lu Yun, Phantom Sword Master, Yin Yang Sword Master. 4 half-step invincible realm experts. This kind of lineup was exaggerated enough at any time, and it had the ability to overturn the whole East Island to meet Li Tianlan's requirements. But the problem was that Situtsangyue didn't want to go to East Island. Not because of East Island itself. It was not because of Jifeng Sword Training School and Wuji Palace. It was because of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Although its strength had been shifting in the past 2 years, the Purgatory of Heaven capital still had a lot of influence in East Island. Because of Li Kuangtu of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Or perhaps there were others. The atmosphere was getting more and more oppressive. Qing Feng forced a smile and opened his mouth. He wanted to say something. Li Tianlan glanced at him. His eyes were calm, and could even be said to be clear. However, Qing Feng suddenly lost the courage to speak and lowered his head in silence. He understood Li Tianlan's eyes. So calm, so determined. All he wanted was an answer. There was no need for a reason. To East Island, Situtsangyue finally spoke. Her face was a little pale, and her smile was a little forced, but her voice was still gentle. How far do you want to go? Li Tianlan tapped the glass in his hand with his fingers. Quiet and indifferent. Those who obey me shall prosper, those who oppose me shall perish. With a calm voice, he gave his answer. An answer that left no room for discussion. Situtsangyue's body shook slightly and she said in a low voice, including, nothing. Li Tianlan interrupted her and said softly, I just want what I want, that's all. That was all. Nothing was included, which meant that everything was included. What he wanted was East Island. So everything in East Island was no different to Li Tianlan. Wuji Palace, Jifeng Sword Raining School, Purgatory of Heaven Capital, all the dark forces. Those who obey me will prosper, those who oppose me will perish. Situ Sanyue suddenly stood up. She glanced at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan looked up at her, his eyes clear and soft. Come with me. Situ Sanyue suddenly said and walked out of the restaurant. She walked quietly in front, down the stairs, and out the door. In front of him was still the same unchanging snowstorm, vast and boundless. Situ Sanyue walked quietly. She was in a trance. Li Tianlan followed her, silent and indifferent. The wind and snow fluttered the black cloak he was wearing, and the long hem of the cloak floated gently in the wind and snow. The complicated and dense golden patterns on the cloak formed mysterious patterns one after another in the transformation of the cloak. Li Tianlan stood straight, exuding an extremely sharp majesty. What if I refuse? Situ Sanyue suddenly whispered. Li Tianlan didn't seem surprised. He just nodded and said, I can understand. What if I refuse? Situ Sanyue asked again, in a faint tone. Then Mount Shu will go by itself, and Saint will lead the team. Li Tianlan said. Situ Sanyue smiled and kept walking. She repeated again, what if I refuse? Li Tianlan was silent for a while, chuckled, and repeated his first answer. I can understand. He said. Those who obey me will prosper, and those who oppose me will perish. Situ Sanyue laughed. How could it be? Li Tianlan couldn't help laughing. I respect your choice. If Sai City refuses, I will go down the mountain. No one will perish. Sai City will always be a friend of Emperor Dong's palace. You are not included. He couldn't forget what Sai City had done for him, so he really understood. He didn't mind Situ Sanyue refusing his request, but he would regret it. If he left Sai City today and returned without accomplishing anything, then it seemed that Sai City was destined to go on a completely different path from Emperor Dong's palace. They are not included. Situ Sanyue's voice was low. Li Tianlan looked at Situ Sanyue with a smile and said softly, really? Isn't it? Situ Sanyue looked at Li Tianlan with sharp eyes. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and said lightly, I haven't thought about this, and it's not what I should think about. Before my grandfather died, he handed the Li family to me. Different people may have different answers, but in my eyes, the Li family is my Li family, and I don't accept betrayal. That's not betrayal. Situ Sanyue's voice was a little excited. That's your answer. Li Tianlan said softly, in my eyes, it's betrayal. Including Li Guangtu. Including the old man standing next to Li Guangtu. Many people, betrayal. In Li Tianlan's eyes, they were betrayers. In their eyes, Li Tianlan might also be a betrayal. They were the same. I can accept different ideas, just like Sai City now. Auntie, I won't blame you whether you help me or not, but I won't accept betrayal. He looked at Situ Sanyue and whispered, I'm here to confirm one thing. Situ Sanyue bit her lip and did not speak. Li Tianlan's voice became somewhat cold, the Heavenly Parish Palace. Whose Heavenly Parish Palace is it? Many years ago, after the collapse of the Li family, Li Honghe gave up everything on the surface. It had gathered most of the Li family's power and allowed the Li family to complete nirvana after a long period of dormancy. Countless elders of the Li family left the cage of the Li family, left Zhongzhou state, and formed a new organization. That was the prototype of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. In other words, it was the new Li family. It was the Purgatory of Heaven capital that Li Honghe planned to leave to Li Tianlan, and the brand new Li family that Li Tianlan planned to leave to Li Tianlan. Senluo Hall, Long Life Hall, and Athanasi Hall became the main combat forces of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. They were also the powerful armed forces of the Purgatory of Heaven capital to deter all forces. But this was not the complete Purgatory of Heaven capital. The complete purgatory of Heaven Capital had 5 departments: Limitless, Longevity, Undying, Heaven's Net, Heaven's Fall. Tian Luo was in charge of intelligence. Meteorite was a knife hidden in the dark. A killing knife. This saber also had another name, Sai City of Zhongzhou State. Sai City had always been the most important department of the purgatory of Heaven Capital and the Li family. Li Tianlan thought that the Li family was his own. But Heavenly Fall, was it his Heavenly Fall or Li Kuangtu's Heavenly Fall? In the wind and snow, Situ Tsanyue's face became paler. Li Tianlan's question left her with no room to avoid it. Sai City could be a pure Sai City. It could be Li Tianlan's heavenly meteor. Li Tianlan wouldn't mind. But if she chose Li Kuangtu, she would be the enemy of Emperor Dong's palace. She didn't want to be Li Tianlan's enemy or leave the Li family, so she had to go to East Island. Overturn everything in East Island with the attitude of, those who obey me will prosper, and those who oppose me will perish. He overturned Wuji Palace, Jifeng Sword Raining School, and everything in the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Break everything that belonged to the purgatory of Heaven Capital and turn it into something that belonged to Li Tianlan. This was tantamount to becoming enemies with Li Kuangtu. Li Kuangtu was her man. I used to be. But he was also the only man she had intimate contact with in her life. You will kill him. Situ Tsanyue lowered her eyebrows and whispered. Li Tianlan knew who she was referring to. After a long silence, he thought of Li Honghe. Shaking his head slightly, he whispered, probably not. He said probably. Situ Tsanyue also thought of Li Honghe. Perhaps until now, Li Kuangtu didn't understand that her meeting with him was not an accident. It came from an old man's arrangement. The very first arrangement. Situ Tsanyue laughed. Her vision was a little blurry. She lowered her head slightly and whispered, Sai City will go to East Island. After a pause, she gave the clearest answer, Heavenly Meteor Palace will go to East Island. Li Tianlan looked at her silently. His eyes were no longer looking at an elder, but looking at an important part of his power map soberly and rationally. He would give her the greatest trust, and also give her the most solemn promise. Li Tianlan nodded. His voice shook the wind and snow. There is a place for you in my dynasty. Yes. Situ Tsanyue lowered her head. Her voice was sad and a little dazed, but it was extremely clear. Your Majesty. Chapter 896. When she opened her eyes, the room was gloomy and gloomy. The clock on the wall was ticking. She moved and looked at the time. For a moment, she couldn't tell whether it was day or night. The curtains were closed, there was no sunlight outside, and it was quiet around. Bai Yuming sat up, put on her slippers, opened the curtains, and saw the vast snow outside. It seemed to be afternoon. It was going to be dark. She shook her head with difficulty and subconsciously touched the wounds on her body. The feeling of weakness was still there, and her whole body was soft. Her ears seemed to be still echoing the raging artillery fire. All kinds of weapons shone in different colors and roared unscrupulously in the desert under the night sky. The earth-shattering sound seemed to have been imprinted in the depths of her heart. It was the explosion, the blood, and the flying yellow sand. Bai Yuming stood by the window and looked out. The surroundings were quiet and warm. Outside the window was flying snowflakes. Yesterday, today. What she thought and what she saw seemed to be two completely different worlds. She stood on the edge of the world, and her whole person had a sense of being torn apart. Her spirit was not tense, but she still did not completely relax. Chaotic memories kept rolling. She remembered that she helped Li Tianlan clean up the bodies of the dead in the desert. She remembered that she flew to Suzhou with the helicopter from Suzhou. She did not return to Tiannan in Suzhou, but returned to Yuzhou. Home, Bai Yuming was at a loss for a long time before she realized that she was at home, in her room. No matter what the outcome of last night's war was, it was over. She touched the wounds on her body. Countless wounds, big and small, had healed and formed scabs. The Dongqing clan and the Bai family naturally had a way to remove scars. Her injury was not too serious, and there was no serious problem on the surface of her body. The internal injury still needed to rest for a period of time. The main thing was the weakness brought by mental exhaustion and severe exhaustion, which made her weak. There was also the sequela brought by the Daoist madness. The Daoist madness, she thought of Azura Path. She thought of her commander. Her knife pierced into his chest. They said goodbye. Said goodbye. Bai Yuming was silent for a long time. It was hard for her to describe her psychological feelings. It was a little low, but not heart-wrenching. She was muddle-headed. That knife seemed to have merged with every picture of the Desert War. Perhaps it was a little special, but they were indeed fused together. Bai Yuming grabbed her hair. She had liked him before. In the past, she shook her head again and drank the recovery potion on the bedside table. She changed out of her pajamas and put on some loose clothes before walking out of her room. A burst of hearty laughter came from downstairs. It sounded familiar. Bai Yuming stood on the railing of the corridor and looked down, slightly stunned. On the sofa in the living room downstairs, a man in his 30s was watching. The calm and composed man sat there, talking happily with his grandfather Bai Zhanfang. Although he was a junior, he showed no fear and trepidation in the face of the most senior counselor in Jianghu state. His every move was free and easy, and his momentum was magnificent. Bai Zhanfang sat opposite him with a smile. His face was ruddy and he seemed to be in a good mood. Bai Yuming blinked her eyes and forced herself to wake up from her muddle-headed state. She adjusted her mood and chuckled. Brother-in-law, long time no see. What a rare guest. I thought the speaker had forgotten where the Bai family is. Bai Zhanfang raised his head and glanced at his granddaughter, smiling without saying a word. Opposite him, Ziyuanshan, who was now the speaker of Jianghu, raised his head and glared at Bai Yuming. He scolded with a smile, "How dare you call me brother-in-law? Every time you open your mouth, you call me brother-in-law. I think you've forgotten about me, your brother. I am 1 year older than Qiuqi. Qiuqi has always called me sister. It's right to call you brother-in-law." Bai Yuming raised the corner of her mouth and sped up her pace to go downstairs. Zhou Yuanshan shook his head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. In this generation of the three pillars of the giant group, he, Bai Yuming, and Dongqing Qiuqi were close in age. They could be said to be childhood friends. He was 4 years older than Dongqing Qiuqi, and Bai Yuming was 1 year older than Dongqing Qiuqi. In this way, Bai Yuming, who called Zhou Yuanshan brother since childhood, always regarded herself as sister after they got married. When they got married, if Zhou Yuanshan didn't call her sister, he almost couldn't get into the bridal chamber. It was a dark history with no moral integrity. Now, every time he met Bai Yuming, she called him brother-in-law, which made his scalp numb. Bai Yuming went downstairs and poured herself a glass of water. She sat on the sofa casually and looked at Zhou Yuanshan. "Are you here for a meeting?" 3 months at the political college. Zhou Yuanshan smiled. It was an exception for him to serve as the speaker of Jianghu. Letting Dongqing Qiuqi serve as the governor of Jianghu was the first in history. The speaker and the governor of a province were husband and wife. This was not only unprecedented, but also unprecedented. Dongqing Qiuqi received the admission notice from the political college soon after she took office. Now she had just returned to Jianghu. With the gradual improvement of the situation, especially the stability of Jianghu, Zhou Yuanshan naturally couldn't avoid this process. Political college, tut, advanced course? Is the speaker going to become a member of parliament? Bai Yuming smiled. Zhou Yuanshan picked up a pillow and threw it at her. Bai Yuming took the pillow and held it in her arms. "You are more optimistic than me." Zhou Yuanshan shook his head. Training course. The study in the political college was generally divided into advanced course and training course. Entering the advanced course basically meant that the officials were going to be promoted or had been promoted, and the latter meant to recharge. Of course, in some special periods, there would be other good or bad interpretations. Zhou Yuanshan's qualifications were indeed shallow when compared with the position of governor, especially the speaker. The training course at the level of governor was barely gilded. Oh, Bai Yuming answered, holding the pillow and saying nothing. She forced herself to behave normally, but she was extremely tired both mentally and mentally. Sitting on the sofa, her eyes were a little dull. She found that she hadn't slept enough. Didn't have a good rest? Bai Zhanfang glanced at her and asked with a smile. It's mainly because I'm not used to it. Bai Yuming shook her head silently. From the battlefield to home, I still need to take a rest. Is the injury serious? Zhou Yuanshan asked. The injury is not serious, but I feel very tired. Bai Yuming shook her head. Tired. Bai Zhanfang and Zhou Yuanshan fell silent at the same time. More than 1,000 victims in Emperor Dong's palace. And Yang Xiaoxiong, who died in the hands of Bai Yuming. These were all reasons that made Bai Yuming feel tired. Zhou Yuanshan thought for a moment and smiled reluctantly. Qiuqi should be on the plane now. I arranged for the secretary to pick her up. After dinner, let her talk with you. Maybe you will feel better. Bai Yuming blinked her eyes, showed a smile, and said yes. She and Dongqing Qiuqi hadn't seen each other for a while. Bai Zhanfang frowned. If you really feel tired, take a break for a while. He said softly, don't go to Tiannan during this time. Stay at home with me. Well, Tianlan will come in the evening. You tell him. Tianlan is coming? Bai Yuming was a little surprised. Family dinner. Everyone will come. Your grandpa Dongqing will also come. Bai Zhanfang chuckled. What happened? Looking at her grandpa's glowing face, Bai Yuming was a little expectant. Good news. Bai Zhanfang couldn't hide his smile. It's all good news. The door of the villa was pushed open. A graceful and beautiful figure walked into the villa. Before seeing Bai Zhanfang, she had already laughed cheerfully. Dad, I'm back. She took off her coat and walked into the living room. Zhou Yuanshan had already stood up at the first time and called her mom. Bai Qingxian smiled and waved her hand to let Zhou Yuanshan sit down. She sat next to Bai Yuming, reached out to touch her head, and asked softly, how is your injury? Bai Yuming held a pillow, slowly leaned against Bai Qingxian's arms, and shook her head. Bai Qingxian quietly held her niece and didn't speak for a while. What do you want to eat tonight? It's time to prepare dinner. Bai Zhanfang asked. Bai Qingxian smiled. At this moment, her whole body seemed to be shining with a kind of soft brilliance. I just talked to Tianlan on the phone. It's snowing, and he wants to eat hot pot. Bai Zhanfang smiled and nodded. Yes, it's warm. Bai Qingxian nodded. Tianlan said he had something to discuss with me. What is it? Bai Zhanfang was a little stunned. I don't know. Bai Qingxian smiled softly. But no matter what it is, her voice paused for a moment before she continued, I agree. Chapter 897. At 5:00 in the afternoon. In Yuzhou, in front of a luxury jewelry counter in the Oriental Mall, Qin Weibai gently turned her white and soft wrist. Looking at the green jade bracelet on her wrist, she chuckled and said, Does it look good? It's very beautiful, ma-am. This jade rabbit matches your temperament perfectly. It suits you very well. I have to say, your taste, the professionally trained shopping guide praised sincerely. But before she finished speaking, Qin Weibai interrupted her with a smile. This is a gift I prepared for the elders. The shopping guide's smile stiffened and she wanted to smooth things over awkwardly. Qin Weibai had already turned to look at horsewoman beside her. What do you think? Boss, we have more than 25% of the Posey family's shares. Horsewoman helped Qin Weibai hold her coat with one hand and a small gift bag in the other. Her expression was meticulous. The Posey family was a famous family in Europe. To be exact, they were the first jeweler in Europe. If Qin Weibai needed jewelry, she could ask them to customize it. It's too late to prepare. Qin Weibai shook her head, took off the bracelet on her hand, and whispered with a smile, "It's just a token of my appreciation for our first formal meeting. You don't need to be too deliberate." She nodded to the shopping guide. "Wrap it up." Horsewoman immediately handed a bank card without a password to the shopping guide. The exquisite bag in her hand had already been filled with many small gifts. They were indeed small gifts. At least, they were not big. For example, there were scarves, watches, jewelry, and about a dozen pieces scattered around. They were the trophies they had obtained during the afternoon shopping. The shopping guide took the bank card with both hands and trotted to pay the bill. Qin Weibai looked down at the jewelry in the counter casually. She blinked her eyes, thinking about what she seemed to have overlooked. Horsewoman held the gift and looked at the relaxed and quiet boss. She could not help but have a strange feeling in her heart. In her impression, this was not the style of the boss at all. She wore a white close-fitting cardigan, black tight straight pants, and high heels. The light-colored coat had been handed over to Horsewoman. Her always simple and light dressing style fully displayed her tall and slender figure. Qin Weibai's figure was not an exaggerated S-shape, but a kind of softness and delicacy that made people feel very comfortable at first sight. The more comfortable it was, the more it became. For some unknown reason, she wore a mask when she went out, covering half of her face. However, her cold and elegant temperament and dreamy bright eyes still attracted countless stunned gazes. Languid, leisurely, gentle, elegant, with a hint of reserved arrogance. She looked carefree and charming. This was a standard state similar to that of a rich lady. But it was not the state that the knight remembered. In her mind, her boss was like a statue of a god. She stood tall, strict, sharp, intelligent, and cold. She never seemed to be in a leisurely state, nor was there the slightest bit of laziness. She always kept herself in the calmest state of mind, thinking about everything and observing everything. She was like a statue of a god that could not be desecrated, but also like a god that could control everything. Perhaps she would become something else. But it was really hard for the knight to imagine that she would become a young housewife. The knight lowered his head and remained silent. Her eyes, which had always been arrogant and aggressive, suddenly dimmed. "What are you thinking about?" An emotionless voice suddenly rang out. Knight was shocked and shook her head subconsciously. Her voice was slightly hoarse. "No, nothing." Qin Weibai stared at her eyes and did not speak. The state that made the knight very familiar seemed to be recovering in Qin Weibai, but it did not make her feel intimate. Knight subconsciously averted his gaze. "You feel uncomfortable." Qin Weibai sat on the high chair and casually looked at the jewelry in the window. Her tone was very sure. Knight bit her lip and did not speak. At that moment, she did feel uncomfortable. Very, very uncomfortable. "Speak." Qin Weibai said. "I want to go back to Switzerland." Knight hesitated and said in a low voice. Qin Weibai was silent. She thought for a moment and said lightly, "You are very dissatisfied with me." Knight hesitated and shook his head. He tried to choose his words, trying not to say some words that might irritate Qin Weibai. He said softly, "I just feel that the current situation is not easy to come by. Such a situation is not for us to enjoy life. We can do more." Everything the palace master did was to make Emperor Dong's palace really rise. Now the rising state of Emperor Dong's palace was unstoppable. 2 years. After a period of silence, Li Tianlan had a real invincible momentum. What happened in Sai City today had spread throughout the dark world in the shortest time. Li Tianlan might have his own plan, but his actions were regarded as a show of force by countless people. Such a show of force was naturally extremely powerful, enough to deter most people in the dark world, and even affect the alliance of the major forces against Beihai. Hao Yue group had an accident, and there were faint cracks in the Prince group. The suspected treason of the leader of the special warfare group was brewing little by little. The storm was treacherous, and the undercurrent was surging. Almost all the situations were favorable to Emperor Dong's palace. In Knight's view, everything around was full of opportunities. No matter what she did, Qin Weibai should not be in such a state. I have done what I should do. Qin Weibai was silent for a moment and shook her head. In the current situation, it is best to do nothing for the next period of time. During this period of time? Knight asked in a low voice. After military counselor's operation has a clear result. Qin Weibai said faintly, you have too many questions. Knight was silent and finally stopped talking. Go get the car. Qin Weibai said, Tianlan has come back. Let's pick him up and then go to the Bai family's manor. At 5:30. The sky in Yuzhou had completely darkened. Under the light, the snowflakes in the air became more and more wanton. Dongxing Wudi buttoned up his coat and walked out of the conference room of the Hidden Dragon Sea with a solemn face. Without talking to anyone, he got into his car. One by one, the directors walked out one after another. The cars parked in front of the conference room left one by one. Dongxing Wudi sat in the back row, leaned against the back of the chair, and let out a long breath. Let's go home. How's it going? The car started slowly. Bai Qingzhao, the Deputy Secretary General of the Army Headquarters who personally acted as the driver, asked with a smile. It's hard to say. Dongxing Wudi said slowly, but your matter should be settled. Bai Qingzhao was stunned. His matter, now his biggest demand was to remove the word deputy from the title of Deputy Secretary General in tomorrow's general election, become the Secretary General of the Army Headquarters, and then enter the Parliament of Jianghu State and become one of its members. This was also a relatively important goal of the giant group, and its importance was even second to Dongxing Wudi's re-election next year. This was also something without much suspense. Next year, Bai Zhanfang would definitely retire. He would step down as the Speaker of Yuzhou. Even if it was out of an exchange of interests, Bai Qingzhao could replace him. He shook his head and said gloomily, this is not a gain. Of course it is, and it's a big gain. Dongxing Wudi smiled, looked at the snowflakes outside the window, and recalled the content of the meeting. Too many things had happened today. First, the chairman of Haoyue Group died. This matter attracted everyone's attention at once. Then, before anyone could react, the task force and the General Staff Department submitted reports about the Burning Legion. The most critical witness was killed as soon as he entered the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou. The image of the entire Special Warfare Group's treason suddenly became extremely clear. Li Huaqing held a meeting as soon as possible. It was not a plenary meeting of the Parliament. It was a meeting of the 9 directors. The 9 directors could be said to be the leaders of the major groups in Jianghu State. Obviously, Li Huaqing wanted to control the scope of influence when the situation was unclear. In addition to the 9 directors, Gu Xingyun and Yi Dongsheng, the deputy minister of the army headquarters who first discovered the suspicion of the special warfare group's treason. There was no one else in this meeting. At the beginning of the meeting, Yi Dongsheng had already submitted a report on behalf of the General Staff Department. The conclusion reluctantly given by the task force at the first time was regarded as a formal conclusion. In the conclusion, it was already confirmed that Qi Mulan was seriously suspected of treason. 2 years ago, Li Tianlan destroyed the Qi family was just an overreaction, but it could not be regarded as a crime. On the contrary, his approach saved a lot of losses for Jianghu State. Li Tianlan was not guilty. This was the first point that the Southeast Group and the Giant Group wanted to confirm. It seemed unimportant, but in fact, it was very important. Li Tianlan was not guilty, so the 2 years of imprisonment in the desert was Li Tianlan's grievance. Jianghu State must compensate him. Li Tianlan leaving the desert could not be regarded as a prison break. At the same time, some people who asked for severe punishment of Li Tianlan had to pay some price, and those who supported Li Tianlan would also get benefits. What Li Tianlan did next was bound to be highly tolerated by Jianghu State. Li Tianlan was not guilty, so Qi Mulan was guilty. Qi Mulan was Qi Baizong's adopted son. If something happened to him, Qi Baizong's reputation would inevitably be fatally damaged. In addition, Black Hawk's confession, the whole special warfare group would be in a precarious situation. At the meeting, Gu Xingyun made a speech that lasted nearly 40 minutes. After the necessary review, he denied all the contents of the confession and said that he did not know the cause of Black Hawk's death. At the same time, he stated that the Special Warfare Group would cooperate with all the subsequent investigations of the Parliament. The Special Warfare Group and the Prince Group were closely connected. At the same time, they thought that confirming Li Tianlan's innocence should not be too hasty. When the Parliament was in a heated debate, the news of Sai City came from the outside world. That incredible sword seemed to completely dispel the spirit of the Special Warfare Group. Gu Xingyun was the first to fall silent. The Giant Group and the Southeast Group echoed each other and confirmed Li Tianlan's innocence at the top meeting of Zhongzhou State. Li Huaqing acquiesced in this and emphasized that he would communicate with Li Tianlan and give Emperor Dong's palace adequate compensation appropriately. A task force was also formally set up at the meeting. Dongxing Wudi served as the patriarch, and Yi Dongxing served as the deputy team leader. They transferred real elites from the General Staff Headquarters, the Ministry of Security, and other departments to investigate the Burning Legion and the Special Warfare Group in detail. A lot of things were determined in the nearly 3-hour meeting. Bai Qingzhao's position was naturally determined. It could be seen as a compromise of the Special Warfare Group, or Gu Xingyun's concession in silence. Even without this, I won't have a big problem next year, Bai Qingzhao said in a dull voice. Normally speaking, it's true, Dongxing Wudi said thoughtfully, but now there are some unexpected situations. Bai Qingzhao said, and his eyes became a little fierce. It's not a bad thing. Dongxing Wudi shook his head. A few days ago, I communicated with Saint and military counselor. They seemed to want Qin Xian to go further, but they didn't say it clearly. Tonight, Tianlan should talk to me about this. Bai Zhanfang retired. Under normal circumstances, Bai Qingzhao or Bai Qingxian could at most be promoted. Now this opportunity was very likely to let both brother and sister go further. Dongxing Wudi was silent for a while, then said with a smile, "Let's go home first. There will be hot pot in the evening, and the children will all go there." Bai Qingzhao breathed a sigh of relief and started the car with a smile. At 6:00, the Rolls-Royce with the Yuzhou license plate slowly drove into the Bai family's manor. The back of the car had been isolated. Qin Weibai's face was slightly red. She curled her legs in Li Tianlan's arms and moved. She whispered, "Let me go. We're almost there. Doesn't it hurt anymore?" Li Tianlan chuckled and carelessly played with a pair of translucent and tender jade feet in his palm as if he was touching the most precious treasure. Qin Weibai rolled her eyes at Li Tianlan. Her eyes were like silk, and she said with hatred, "It doesn't hurt at all. You only know how to bully me." She put in a little effort to stretch her feet out of Li Tianlan's arms, bent down to find her socks, and carefully put them on. She whispered with a smile, "You're going too far." Li Tianlan smiled and was about to say something when a bright light suddenly shone from another direction. It was an Audi with a Jianghu license plate. The car of the Jianghu resident office in Beijing. Qin Weibai whispered, "Is it Speaker Zhou? Or Chuchi?" Li Tianlan shook his head. The Rolls-Royce and the Audi stopped in front of the Bai family's villa almost at the same time. An elegant and dignified figure came out of the back row of the Audi. She looked at the Rolls-Royce beside her and seemed to wave in surprise. "Sister Chuchi." Li Tianlan got out of the car and looked at the woman beside the Audi. He was slightly stunned. Dongxing Chuchi stood there, beautiful and dignified. In the flying snow, she was dressed warmly and held a tightly wrapped object in her arms. An object? Li Tianlan was a little stunned. In his sight, the small object moved slightly. "My daughter." Dongxing Chuchi greeted Qin Weibai with a smile and looked at Li Tianlan, who was a little stunned. "When did it happen?" Li Tianlan laughed. He had been in the desert for 2 years, but he really hadn't heard of it. A few months ago. Dongxing Chuchi smiled softly. The child is only 6 months old and can't greet people yet, but we can't do without a greeting gift. Li Tianlan smiled and said yes. He looked at the baby in Dongxing Chuchi's arms curiously. What's her name? Let's go inside. Dongxing Chuchi smiled and walked to the villa. She whispered, Dongxing Yu. You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.